Education. The project documented promising and best practices in adult education and community college alignment in supporting low-skilled students as they advance within community colleges. 4 institutions were selected as showing promise in 4 practice areas: contextualization, acceleration, student support, and hybrid practices. The webinar will focus on contextualization, presented by 2 experts, Amy Dalsimer, LaGuardia Community College, and Michelle Van Noy, Rutgers University. So the next slide is the agenda. Gina, if you could please do the slides for me, because I don't seem to be able to do it. Okay, so this is our agenda today. So we're going to be talking a little bit about kind of giving an overview of the Supporting Student Success Project. Then we'll be covering what is contextualization and some research supporting contextualized learning. Then we're going to be spotlighting LaGuardia Community College's SAFE program. We'll have some questions and answers and talk about some of our future efforts. Okay, great. So just to tell you a little bit about the project. So the project was created in response to the challenges that Americans face in preparing themselves for the ever-evolving workforce. The U.S. Department of Education's Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education, OCTAE, is committed to supporting community college students and strengthening coordination between adult education and developmental education programs in order to better prepare students for the 21st century job market. This is a technical assistance effort aimed at identifying best practices at community colleges across the United States in areas of acceleration, contextualization, student support, and hybrid efforts. These webinars are just one of the products developed by our team in response to the concepts we learned from featured programs. Some of the best practices were highlighted, and the webinars will highlight programs in the area of contextualization, acceleration, student support, and hybrid efforts. And these practices will be shared through a series of virtual webinars, this being the first of 4 webinars, aimed at disseminating promising practices to promote student completion and workforce preparation. And you should stay tuned to hear more from some of our other amazing practitioners. So we're starting with Michelle Van Noy from Rutgers University, and here's a quote from one of the texts that we used in the study, what is contextualization? So welcome, Michelle.
Thanks so much, Sarah. It's great to be here today with everyone and have this opportunity to participate in this webinar and in this project. So, my role here is hopefully just to provide a little bit of context for our discussion about contextualization, a little bit of background on the research. And as Sarah said, just to start off with, we should spend some time defining what is contextualization, and this quotation from the MDRC report, Unlocking the Gate, I think gives us a good starting point. So contextualized instructional models seek to help academically underprepared students progress more quickly through their developmental skill building while engaging directly with their academic or vocational field of interest. So I think this is a very nice quote. It gives us a good starting point. And I should give some background also on that MDRC report. I think that is a great place to look to for more strategies that I think more broadly inform this project. It's a very comprehensive lit review looking at interventions to improve skills of underprepared students, and contextualization is one of them. But that report does get into a nice review of rigorous research on the topic and identifies some studies that provide evidence for looking at contextualization as a strong research-based approach. Okay, so on to the next slide with the features of contextualization. So there are a few key factors that we look for when we think about contextualization. Of course, One is the key idea here is really using career concepts from whatever industry or occupation that you're focused on, whether it be nursing or computer technology or whatever, to use those career concepts during basic skills instruction. And basic skills could be for reading, math, writing, whatever is needed for the students, and to help them really gain the skills that are needed in these basic areas to progress more quickly in their career instruction. And again, with that goal in mind of preparing students for careers is to think about how the curricula can be aligned with industry standards or credentials that are existing that help define what some of those outcomes are. Another feature that we typically see in contextualization is co-teaching, where you have two instructors, one who has the career concepts and the other who has the basic skills instruction as their background, and involves some working together among the two instructors. Contextualization, of course, can occur in many different formats. It can be credit or non-credit, so it really depends on the institution and the goals of the program. But the ultimate goal is to promote students an ability to enter into a career pathway, also while getting a credential, high school credential, or to move into college-level courses. So it really helps to move students along a career pathway. So to dig a little bit more deeply into the idea of contextualization and the research base for it as a strategy, there is literature that suggests that there are certain underlying mechanisms that we think are going on with contextualized instruction that promote learning. And so the first that the learning literature shows us is the transfer of skills. And so we always wonder and want to know how learning from the classroom is going to translate into other contexts, other situations where we hope students will use that information. And so the idea with contextualization is that by teaching students skills within the focused area of interest of their career or industry, that this will help promote the transferability of skills, so that the skills that they pick up in the classroom can be used most directly in the real context that they will experience and that are of value and of interest to them, which then leads to the other underlying mechanisms that support the idea of contextualization, and that one is engagement of students through hands-on learning, with the learning literature showing that students learn most deeply when they're personally engaged with the material. And so contextualization provides an opportunity to make that information on basic skills very relevant and promote hands-on experiences for students, which leads to the final mechanism I wanted to mention today, which is the idea of intrinsic motivation, so that by contextualizing the basic skills instruction and bringing that together, the two topics together, it helps to make the subject personally meaningful to students and to promote their intrinsic motivation, particularly among adult students who really need to see the relevance of their studies to their lives and to their goals and their hopes. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time today talking about some prior research that I have been involved in that provides a research base for the topic of contextualization, and that is the IBEST program in Washington State. I know many people around the country have become familiar with the IBEST model, but I thought I would just provide a quick overview of what that is and talk a little bit about the research base there, and hopefully that will help set the stage for some of the great work that Amy has been doing at LaGuardia. So with the Washington State IBEST model, the idea with the model was to combine basic skills and professional technical instruction, and really in this case the goal was so that students could prepare to enter college-level coursework in a career pathway. In this case, there were basic skills instructors and professional technical faculty who worked together to design and to teach classes together. They were intended to overlap in the classroom a certain amount of time and work together to teach. The idea, of course, with these courses is that they were intended to be part of a coherent program of study that would be designed to lead to a college credential and also to jobs that were in need in the labor market. And so the feature of this is really that the courses were part of a structured pathway, and that was laid out for students to begin with. But I should say, though, I talk about the IBEST as a model, and that there were variations in actually how it ran. It was not all exactly the same across the state. But one of the one of the outcomes of the work with IBEST in Washington is some rigorous quantitative research on the outcomes of IBEST on students who went through the program. And this is based on some research that was done at the Community College Research Center using state records data for all the students who went through IBEST over a course of several years. And controlling for many other different factors, they found that students who went through IBEST were much more likely than similar students who did not take IBEST to earn credits toward a college credential and to complete occupational certificates. And they also found some gains on basic skills tests. So overall, this is some very rigorous research that provided some evidence that this strategy is indeed effective in helping students to move towards their goals. Building on that research, we did some additional field work looking into the IBEST model, and there were some findings from that field work. I alluded to that before on the initial slide talking about IBEST, and that there was, although there was a very coherent model in place for how IBEST should work or would work, there was a bit of variation across the colleges in how they actually implemented it. Overall, the colleges use highly structured pathways to help students understand how their courses would lead to further education and to work. But we did observe a fair amount of variation in the degree of integrated instruction and team teaching. So, it was key that both instructors were working together, but the amount of time that they actually had to spend together within the classroom varied. So that I think that shows that there's quite a bit of variation in terms of how these programs can actually run, and so really the key lesson was that working together, the instructors working together, was important. And certainly a lesson flowing off of that was the need for flexibility for the instructors to work together in terms of having time to plan and to have some overlap certainly in their instructional time. One of the big questions I think everyone asks about IBEST is sort of questions about sustainability and scale and cost. Would this work in a different context outside of Washington? Was the policy context very specific and the funding context very specific in Washington that would make this possible in other places? And I think that's a very interesting question that we've been looking to see how that plays out. And I think that one of the lessons certainly we've seen some other models that have been very successful in trying to take this idea and adapt it to other contexts. As I alluded to, the idea that even in Washington State, things were not all done exactly the same, and so there is some room for taking the idea and the concepts and implementing them in other ways and other contexts that distill some of the key ideas, but make it work given the local resources and policy context. So with that, I will hand over the webinar to Amy to talk about all the work that she's been doing with LaGuardia's program.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, everyone, for joining. What a great and large group. I see some colleagues and friends that I know, and also happy to make the acquaintance of new people across the country. For those of you who don't know, just some background, LaGuardia is part of the City University of New York. We're a very large urban community college. We have almost 20,000 degree-seeking students on our campus and 26,000 non-credit workforce training, ESL, high school equivalency, and adult basic ed students. Our campus is located in Queens, New York, which is the most diverse county, we think, in the world. We have students from 160 countries speaking 125 different languages. The majority of our students are Black and Latino. 40% of our students are immigrant and first-generation Americans, and 70% of our students report annual family incomes of less than $25,000. So we're serving a very low-income population of students who range in age from 19 through 60 and come from very diverse households. To serve this large number of low-skilled basic ed and ESOL students, LaGuardia has developed two types of contextualized career pathway program models that we started piloting back in 2007. As Michelle said, contextualization, broadly defined for us here at LaGuardia, is a strategy that we use to develop students' basic reading, writing, math, and critical thinking skills in the context of a career sector or a specific workforce training. We do believe that contextualized basic skills does increase student motivation and persistence in our classes because students are able to see the explicit connection between the schoolwork they're doing and their own career interests and future goals, which are often economic and often the reasons why they come to school, to get a better job, to increase their economic prospects. Contextualized instruction, we also see here at LaGuardia, can accelerate a student's progress through what could be a long chain of remedial classes and steps along the way to their training or to their college major. So the first model that you see here is our bridge models. Bridge models are essentially sector-focused high school equivalency, ESOL, and basic ed classes. So we have a bridge to healthcare career, bridge to business, bridge to STEM. These classes help students develop academic skills in preparation for a transition to advanced professional training or degree. So they're really contextualized springboards. Contextualized coursework at LaGuardia is generally sector or disciplinary focused and seeks to expose basic skills students at the earliest point to sector-specific content, knowledge and professional practices, vocabulary, while simultaneously developing their academic reading, writing, math, and critical thinking skills. The second type of training contextualized model we've developed here is LaGuardia's NIBEST model, our New York Basic Education and Skills Training model, which was definitely inspired by the innovative practices that Washington State developed, but has really been customized to our specific institutional structure, the resources and funding available to us here in New York and at LaGuardia, and to the particular needs of our students and our community. So we took a lot of inspiration and learned a lot about Washington was doing, but had to develop our own model that would work in our own context. We piloted our first NIBEST model in 2007, and since then we've developed 10 NIBEST healthcare career training programs, including community healthcare worker, medical assistant, patient care tech, training for NIBEST training for foreign trained nurses, and the program that I'm going to share more information about with you, which is our SAVE EMT program. Essentially, these integrated programs help underserved populations develop their basic educational and vocational skills simultaneously so they can advance in healthcare careers and increase their earning potential right away. All of the NIBEST models employ a developmental model of instruction that includes a pre-training vestibule, academic support services, job placement, and exposure to didactic and student-centered teaching strategies. The training and curriculum is designed and taught collaboratively by an experienced vocational instructor and a basic skills educator who's been trained in contextualized developmental coursework. So what I want to do is tell you a little bit more about how the model works, and I'm going to do that by digging into the SAVE EMT program a little bit, which is an example of one of our most long-standing NIBEST programs, but can serve as an example of how we've designed our NIBEST model on the campus across those 10 different training tracks. So the SAVE EMT program prepares students to become certified EMTs and to work in the EMT field here in New York. We have a lot of EMTs here in New York. We have a lot of hospitals, and it's certainly an in-demand occupation. The course includes lectures, labs, 2 basic life support clinical rotations on 911 ambulances here, and is because it's a NIBES model, also has the academic integrated component that's focused on contextualized critical thinking, reading, and writing skills. We piloted the SAVE EMT program in 2003, and since then we've run 10 grant-funded cohorts using a variety of funding from federal, state, and city sources. At the start of the program, our goals were, we had several goals, and we actually ask ourselves these goals every time we move to create a new NIBES program. The first is that we want to make sure we're picking a certification program that's actually preparing students for a viable workforce credential, so something that's a recognized credential that has local labor market demand and opportunity for immediate employment. So we first want to make sure that here in New York, that whatever we're preparing students for, there are jobs and there are good jobs for them when they complete. The second is that it has the potential to be a stackable credential or pathway so that they may be starting as EMTs, but they can move then to paramedic, and from paramedic to physician assistant, or a variety of other healthcare tracks. So here at LaGuardia, for example, you can earn your EMT certification and then transition to our paramedic associate's degree program. The third goal of all of our NIBES trainings, and in particular this SAVE EMT training, was to increase access to this career pathway. So we've had an EMT program on campus for many, many years, but historically only students reading at close to the 11th grade level were admitted. And what we were finding is many of our adult basic ed, basic skills, and ESOL students were not able to even be admitted to the program. So one of the big goals here for us in New York is to try to open access to these training programs so that folks can accelerate their pathway to their new career. The fourth goal around this training and all of our NIBES trainings is to increase the overall retention and completion rates in these in-demand trainings. So with SAVE EMT, even though students in the traditional program were entering with higher reading scores and supposedly higher academic levels than they do now in our NIBES SAVE model, only 50% of students were actually completing the course because it was so rigorous and it was difficult for many of our students, let alone the students who were not at that secondary threshold of academic performance. So there are several key features in our program redesign and turning it into a NIBES SAVE EMT model that we feel have contributed to the success of the program. The first is that we now do a very robust intake. Students interested in applying to the EMT program participate in a 3-day process that happens over the course of several weeks. The 3-day intake helps them determine first if it's a good career choice for them, if they have an interest and if it makes sense, and also it gives us here at LaGuardia a chance to assess candidates' eligibility, suitability, and aptitude for that career, that particular training program as well. Over the course of 3 days, students have an orientation to the profession. They are tested on their reading levels. They complete a career interest inventory. They complete a number of contextualized work-based scenario written questions that help us see their writing, but also to get a sense of how they would critically think and respond in an EMT or in a medical situation. And they also submit, whatever the requirement documents are that are important. So for EMTs, they have to have a legitimate driver's license, and so that's something we have to ask for up front. And during intake, all of our students complete an interview with staff. Once students are conditionally accepted into the program, they start what we call the vestibule. Some of you may have heard about this. And essentially the vestibule is, for the EMT, is a 3-week-long contextualized course that's taught mainly by our basic skills teacher at this point, although the vocational teacher does come in and do some lectures and play some role at that point. The vestibule is really a chance for students to be reintroduced to the classroom and to academic life, and for them to have a lower stakes environment to begin to take on some of the difficult technical content that they'll encounter during their training. In this transitional space, they're developing habits and routines that they need for success in school, like being on time, participating in group work, doing homework, as well as being introduced to critical content and vocabulary that's oftentimes very new. The vestibule is very rigorous, but it does provide a developmental and supportive environment for our students, our non-traditional students, to transition back to school, to be introduced to the EMT course content, and to also kind of work out the kinks of returning to school. So students at that point might still be trying to settle their schedules, put their childcare in place, figure out how to work homework back in. And the nice thing about the vestibule is it gives them a chance to do that before the actual training begins and the stakes are too high. Then once the training starts, we do have a co-teaching model like Michelle described. We have an EMT technical instructor and a contextualized basic skills teacher. They, in the EMT class, share the classroom approximately 30% of the time, but there are also separate hours for the basic skills teacher where the basic skills teacher is doing a variety of things, either previewing coursework that's to come, reviewing what happened in the coursework that might be difficult, and the teacher is really trained to provide multiple learning approaches and strategy to the difficult course content. Finally, the last piece of kind of the features of our NIBES model are these integrated job readiness activities and the employment piece. So during the whole course of the training, there is an hour a week set aside for students to do hands-on job readiness activities like their resumes, practice interviewing, so that when they graduate, they're really poised to get that job right away, since the main goal of all these trainings is employment. Employers are a big piece of our model. They offer the internships, and they also come to our job clubs at the end of each cohort graduation to provide, to screen our new candidates and to hopefully offer them jobs. All of this redesign and all of these features we feel have really resulted in tremendously improved outcomes for all of our training programs. So the SAVE program, just to give you a snapshot of our outcomes, of the last 5 cohorts that we've served through grant funding, 85% of them have finished the coursework. And if you recall, only 50% of EMT students were finishing beforehand. So we've managed to open access to lower level students through the redesign, but many more of them are being successful in finishing this rigorous course. 88, actually closer to 90, have passed the state EMT licensing exam, and 77% were hired within 3 months in their field. And most of them because they were unemployed or very underemployed and working in service, have had a big jump in their hourly and are now have access to jobs with full and good benefits.
You're good.
I see there's a lot of questions, but let me just give you 2 more minutes and then we'll move to those questions. Because this is focused on contextualized instruction, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of sense of how that curriculum process happens, because we did develop the curriculum here at LaGuardia. It is a collaborative process between oftentimes feedback from the employers first, and certainly between our professional and vocational departments and our basic skills department. When you get started, the first thing that you need to do is sort of determine your co-teaching model. So there's a lot of good information which I can share with you about co-teaching and the different types of models. I think they've identified 7. Some are traditional, which is that you're together all the time. Others are more complementary or supportive. but it's important to understand, for the teachers to understand how they're going to be working together and what their roles and responsibilities are in the classroom. Co-teaching for us is, essentially two or more teachers working together to plan, conduct, and evaluate the integrated outcomes, curriculum, learning activities, and assessment for the same group of students. And the instructors who are teaching have equal levels of responsibility. So that's kind of important. The basic skills staff are professionals in developmental education and contextualizing curriculum, and the technical staff, obviously the professional staff, have absolute knowledge over the content, in this case of being an EMT. The other big piece of developing curriculum is identifying the difficult parts in the curriculum. So part of the job of the basic skills instructor is to say, where do students struggle, where do we need to deepen and add multiple learning activities so students can really conquer this curriculum. And for EMT, a lot of that work happens around anatomy and physiology and body systems, because that's very dense, and many of our students have not had exposure to science and working with the body and anatomy and physiology at that level before. The other thing that we do here at LaGuardia that I just want to share with you is when we develop a curriculum, we're essentially looking at developing 4 sets of skills or developing students' abilities in 4 areas. So one is just being able to identify the academic skills, reading, writing, math skills. Some are, what are the things we want students to be able to know and do, writing case notes, summarizing, reading charts and graphs. The second is the technical skills and content, and that's obviously determined by what EMTs need to learn and know how to do in their field. The third category is what we call routines and habits for success. That's more like, I guess you'd call them the soft skills, like being on time, either for class and or for work, learning how to study, test-taking strategies. And the fourth are really also, again, those soft skills, the professional and affective skills that are so needed in the workplace, especially as EMTs, like working with a partner, working in pairs, presentation skills, ethics, how to treat patients, that kind of work. Those are also the learning objectives of the curriculum. Another big piece is talking with your co-teacher about how to assess students. And one thing we found as we tried to integrate more and more of our trainings is that a lot of the trainings use very high stakes testing and formal assessment. But there weren't, before we integrated the curriculum, there weren't many opportunities for informal assessment. And so part of the job of the basic skills teacher has been to try to build that in as a way of monitoring students' learning and progress so that we can make sure they're ready and staged for those high stakes, more formal tests that they have to take. We ask instructors to not just share the syllabi, but to really integrate not only their assessments, but their grading system so that they're speaking in one voice rather than having 2 separate syllabi, 2 separate grading systems. And finally, a big piece is just the communication around integrating the work and co-teaching so that our teachers meet weekly. They have a scheduled planning and meeting weekend, and that's really important to talk about students and to preview what's coming. So finally, and I want to move to the questions, the lessons that we've learned here, we feel that our intake and our vestibule has been really key as a piece of the model to student success, so giving students a supported and contextualized transition back to school. Having a more comprehensive assessment, again, so not just those high stakes tests or exam, but looking at student performance in a number of ways in an ongoing way to respond to what they need. certainly the co-teaching and bringing the expertise of the professional along with the expertise of our basic skills instructor together has really been a powerhouse for the students in terms of getting the content and also the scaffolding they need to master the curriculum. We have local employer involvement, which has really helped us with our own placements in terms of our job outcomes. And finally, this idea that it's part of a pathway and students can go on. Professional development has also been a huge piece of the work we've done here. So we've been doing NIBEST since 2007 and learned a lot from it. We've made a lot of mistakes, but we have invested a lot in the professional development of our NIBEST teams and our instructors, and that's made a huge difference. So I'm going to stop there and turn it back over to Sarah.
Yes, thank you so much, both Michelle and Amy. This was such a wonderful presentation, and we have so many questions that I've been keeping track of. So one of the things that was asked was that research suggests that skills don't automatically transfer unless we also build students thinking about transfer and metacognition. Would either one of you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I can respond to that. I think that certainly makes sense. I mean, I will say from looking at the the literature on transfer that it's one of those puzzles that's not completely well understood, but that it's a difficult challenge to make sure that information does transfer and it's conveyed in a way that it does transfer. And certainly there are many different aspects to that, and I think that that question raises another interesting angle here as well. To help the students, think about how to take the skills from the classroom and bring them to bear in other contexts. So certainly working with the students to think about how to do that is certainly important. And I think teaching in a contextualized way is sort of the first step towards that goal.
Another question is, and I think a couple of people asked that. So do students have to have a high school equivalency credential prior to starting the training?
For the EMT, the SAVE EMT, they do, and they don't have to in all of our NIBEST programs, and I'll explain that. So in New York City, all of the EMT employers require a high school diploma, even for students who have passed the state EMT exam. So we learned the hard way that if students didn't have that, they couldn't get a job. That said, we have lots of students here in New York who are reading between the 5th and the 10th grade, 11th grade level who had high school completion, either an HSE or a high school, but as you know, weren't necessarily, when they left high school, weren't necessarily prepared at the level of for academics to be reading and writing at the levels that were required of our EMT program admissions. So we accept students now. I see one of the questions is what's the level. So you have to have a high school diploma or a high school credential, but you have to be reading at the 8th grade level and above to be admitted to SAVE. So the issue for us here was to make sure people were going to be able to get jobs, but also to open access for people who were being precluded from admission because they were reading at lower levels.
A couple other questions that are really interesting and important. So were there particular strategies that you used to increase retention and completion rates? And also, were there separate times set aside for resume writing and interviewing skills?
So yeah, there's an hour. So the easy one is there's an hour set aside every week or integrated into the program hours for what we call, job readiness, explicit job readiness activities, so that by the time they graduate, they have EMT resumes and they have had practiced interviews and they've done a series of, job readiness activities, so they're poised to go onto the job market and be in good shape. The retention and engagement strategies is a great question. It's a very big question that's that's a whole day's workshop about how we do that in the program. It's a combination of things. It's the contextualized curriculum, which allows students to engage in the content in a way that they develop mastery and they're working with their peers and they're engaged in the classroom as opposed to just a didactic or a lecture model. So the curriculum is very hands-on and students are very engaged with it. We also have very robust educational case management and attendance and student support activities that are going on. So somebody loses their child care or somebody doesn't have enough money to take the metro to school, there's an educational case manager who's assisting kind of with all those life barriers.
We have a couple of other wonderful questions here. So what other fields besides EMT were considered, and what suggestions do you have for programs that don't have access to instructors or materials directly related to a career path?
So we have 10 different NIBES programs running. We have medical assisting, community health worker, like the NCLEX prep, which is sort of nursing for foreign trained professionals. There's a lot of them, and I would like to share my website with you guys so that you can go on and see. We have a ton of information about the programs. We have data there, and we also have a bunch of curriculum samples and resources. I see there's some questions about curriculum, so our website is really the best place to go to get more detail. What advice do I have for people who don't have access? That's a really good question. I would love to talk to you maybe offline about what your thinking is. We have, like I said, several models here. So we have the integrated training models. We also have the contextualized basic skills models, which are essentially high school equivalency basic ed and ESOL classes that have been contextualized around career sectors. And those are also very effective. And so I'm happy to talk to whomever offline about the work that we do here and how it might be helpful to your own goals.
Another question was, what methods did you use to determine what careers were in demand in your area?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
We have access to a bunch of local labor market tools, and I'm sure Michelle can speak more about this, but we have I'm not sure if any of you use there's a burning glass technology that you could look at, which kind of aggregates information on available careers. There is obviously information about local careers that's published by the Department of Labor that you can break down through the Occupational Outlook that kind of breaks it down by region so you can see where the growth is. And then I think, you could probably start just by asking your local State Department of Labor, but Michelle may have other ideas.
No, I think, Amy, you hit on some of the main ones. I think those are all very good suggestions. I mean, looking at the state data gives you some big picture projections, and then Burning Glass also helps to zero in on some more local and more kind of current trends. So those are very good places to start. And then also doing direct outreach to employers, through advisory boards and just contacts that you have with employers that might be affiliated with your programs is also a very good strategy. So I think a multi-pronged strategy is always a very good one because there's lots of angles on bringing together labor market data.
So someone was asking a question about the ESL students, and if you have anyone on staff with extensive ESL teaching experience or language advocates to look at your materials. I think they really wanted to know what is your strategy for working with ESOL
Right.
students.
So we have a big, as I said in the beginning, 40% of our students here at LaGuardia are immigrants and first-generation Americans, and we have a very large ESL population here. Half of our NIBES programs are ESL focused. And they're run through CIET, my partners and colleagues at the CIET, which is the Center for Immigrant Education and Training. So we have a lot of expertise around designing integrated training programs for ESL students. And I think, one of the lessons learned is in the planning phase is not just about what are the sectors that are growth sectors, where are the in-demand opportunities, but also who are our student population and how are we going to customize the training for the need and the population that exists. And so while we have these key design elements like intake and the vestibule and integrated job readiness and co-teaching that run through all 10 of our programs, each of the 10 programs is designed slightly differently in terms of the length of the vestibule, the amount of overlap of co-teaching, according to oftentimes the needs of the student population. So some programs admit students at lower levels than others. So it's a balancing act between saying how much access can we offer? Can we admit people at the 5th grade level and still get them through this community health worker training, where the readings are at the 12th level and 13th grade reading level? How can we do that? Can we do that at the 5th grade and still get that done in, a year? Or do we need to, admit people at slightly higher level, let's say the 7th grade, and accomplish those goals? So ESL students are similar in that it's a population that we're looking to serve, and when we design the program and the curriculum, we have their particular learning needs in mind.
Okay, great.
Okay, I think that's all the time that we have, and I want to just get into some of the future efforts that we will be going to do. We're going to have another webinar that's focusing on the Student Success Project. Acceleration will be on February 2nd at 1 p.m. Student support will be, and that will feature Gateway Community College. The student support webinar will be on March 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and that will feature Amarillo College. We have the hybrid practices on April 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, and it will feature St. Louis Community College. We're also developing some webinars, some videos that will focus in on very particular strategies that came out of our study. One will be on managing change. Another will be on integrating adult education and developmental education. And the other video will be supporting student success via professional development. So you should keep an eye out for some of that material. So I want to thank everyone for your participation in today's webinar. I want to, in particular, thank our two presenters, Amy and Michelle. A wonderful, very informative webinar. So if you, on our last slide, if you have if you need any additional information, you will see Gina Davis from Manhattan Strategy, LaGuardia Community College, and also Michelle Van Noy's email address. So again, I want to thank everyone for your participation, and I want to wish everyone a wonderful day. Thanks so much.